Somewhere in the West Midlands in the winter of 1993, a police officer watched a car pull away from him and gave up. Not because he wanted to, because he physically couldn't keep up. The car ahead of him looked like something your dad might have driven to the supermarket. 4 doors, a boot big enough for the weekly shop, dark green paint, utterly, deliberately forgettable. And yet the fastest cars British police could put on the road couldn't get anywhere near it. One officer admitted to the press, and I'm quoting, "We simply haven't been able to get near the thing, and it looks unlikely that we ever will." This is the story of how an ordinary British family saloon became so fast, so uncatchable, and so feared that newspapers demanded it be banned outright. A car that humiliated Ferraris, terrified the police, and frightened the country that built it. This is the Lotus Carlton. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to 1986. That year, the giant American corporation General Motors bought a small, proud British company called Lotus. Lotus were tiny, but they had a reputation that money couldn't buy. Their engineers, people said, could make a brick fly. And the man running General Motors' European division at the time was a genuine Lotus fan. He knew exactly what he had his hands on. So an idea took shape. What if you took an ordinary mass-market family car, the sort things sold in their thousands to reps and families across Britain and Europe, and handed it to Lotus? Not for a badge and a body kit, for a complete transformation. The car they chose was the Vauxhall Carlton. In Europe it was sold as the Opel Omega, and in 1986 it was about as far from a supercar as you could get. A large rear-wheel drive family saloon with understated looks and a sensible image. It was so well-rounded it was actually crowned European Car of the Year. Comfortable, respectable, completely anonymous. General Motors gave the Lotus engineers a brief that was almost insultingly short. Make it faster. And they gave them about 1.5 years to do it. What Lotus did next went well beyond the brief. Instead of building a fast but sensible saloon, something in the spirit of a BMW M5 or a Mercedes, the Lotus engineers essentially built a car for themselves. A supercar with a wild streak, tricky to handle, that just happened to have 4 doors and a large boot. They started with the standard 3-litre straight 6. They brought it out to 3.6 litres. Then came forged pistons, a new crankshaft, new connecting rods, a reworked intake and exhaust. And then, for good measure, they bolted on a pair of Garrett turbochargers. The result was 377 horsepower. To put that in context, the Ferrari Testarossa of the day, a genuine poster supercar, made 390. This was a Vauxhall. There was so much power that GM did not even have a gearbox strong enough to cope. The solution was almost comic. They borrowed the transmission design for the Chevrolet Corvette ZR1. The rear differential came from the Holden Commodore, all the way from Australia. Early tests were terrifying. The car would suddenly snap and lose traction, so Lotus retuned the entire suspension and commissioned special Goodyear tyres with a secret compound made for this car alone. And then there was the colour. Every single one was painted in one shade. Imperial green. A quiet nod to British racing green, because for all the German engineering and Australian parts and American money, this was at its heart a British car, built in Britain by Lotus with something to prove. From the outside, it still looked like a Vauxhall. That was the whole point, and that was exactly what made it so dangerous. On paper, the numbers were absurd. 0 to 60 in a shade over 5 seconds. That didn't just beat its rivals, it put a 4-door family saloon on par with purebred supercars. But the real magic was at the top end, where fast German saloons were electronically limited to a gentlemanly 155 miles per hour. The Lotus Carlton simply kept going. Its top speed was 176 miles per hour, making it, for years, the fastest 4-door saloon in the world. The British magazine Autocar ran a test measuring how fast a car could accelerate to 100 miles per hour and then stop again. In that test, the Lotus Carlton was beaten by exactly one car on sale, the Ferrari F40, a mid-engined, stripped-out, twin-turbo legend. and a Vauxhall was snapping at its heels. It humbled the Porsche 911 Turbo. It was quicker to 200 kilometers per hour than a BMW M5 that wouldn't even exist for another 8 years. A small British firm working out of Norfolk had taken the establishment's most ordinary car and used it to embarrass everyone. But that kind of speed in a car anyone could walk into a dealer and buy brought a very particular kind of trouble. The problem was simple. This was the fastest four-door saloon in the country, and it looked like nothing, which made it the perfect getaway car. Criminals worked this out fast. The most notorious case began on the 26th of November 1993. A Lotus Carlton was stolen from a house in the West Midlands. Over the following months, a gang used it as a battering ram, smashing into shops at night and making off with cigarettes and alcohol, worth around £20,000. The police never caught them. They couldn't. The fastest car the force had was a Vauxhall Senator, which topped out well short of the Carlton. Chasing this thing was hopeless, and the police as good as admitted it. That quote from the start, "We simply haven't been able to get near the thing," that was a real officer on the record, conceding defeat to a stolen family saloon. And then there's the legend. The story goes that one of these cars out on the M6 was being tracked from above by a police helicopter and lost it. There's no footage, no hard proof, and it may well be a myth, but the fact that people believed it and repeated it tells you everything about the reputation this car had earned. It had become folklore, an outlaw in a business suit. This is where the establishment fought back. The British press, never shy of a moral panic, turned on the car completely. Newspapers ran the story hard, splashed the crimes across their pages, and openly called for the Lotus Carlton to be banned from sale. A production car, on trial in the tabloids. Think about how strange that is. Nobody was calling for Ferraris to be banned. Nobody was panicking about Lamborghinis. It was the Vauxhall, the everyman car that had quietly become too powerful, that the country decided it couldn't handle. The bans never actually came, but a quieter kind of restriction crept in. Buyers who turned up at dealers were asked unofficially whether they held a racing license. If you didn't, you might find every car was mysteriously reserved and you'd leave empty-handed. Britain had built the fastest saloon in the world and then got cold feet about who it let drive one. In the end, the Lotus Carlton was killed off not by the police and not by Parliament, but by indifference. It was expensive, demanding, and it never really sold. Of 1,100 planned, only around 950 were ever built. By 1992, production had quietly stopped. And yet, look at it now. Values have climbed. Survivors are cherished, and it's earned that untouchable status of a modern classic. Because the Lotus Carlton is one of those rare, gloriously British ideas, the sort of thing that shouldn't exist, built by people who didn't ask permission, that briefly frightened an entire country. It's a very British story in the end. We built something world-beating, something audacious and brilliant and a little bit mad, and then we got scared of it. The Lotus Carlton wasn't just the fastest saloon of its age, it was proof of what this country can do when a small team is handed something ordinary and told simply, make it faster.